Good evening, everyone. Perhaps it's not evening where you're at, but it's evening on the East Coast. So, that's really all that matters because the East Coast sets the standard for the rest of the world. Right? This is where the Enlightenment took hold in a very real way. Of course, it's not to say that one should be devoid of spiritual sentiment. I haven't the faintest idea whether my friend is alive or not. Have not seen him in quite a while. But this is the incense that he always burned. He was Taiwanese. I think this is a dragonberry. And he lent me a room, or rather let me stay in one, with excellent acoustics. Had a lot of fond memories there, hanging out with friends, cooking food, pretty good stuff. Well, today I have purchased some Glenfiddich, which is a single malt Scotch, much like the Glenlivet that I've been drinking. Now, I am by no means an expert. I've only recently begun my whiskey journey, so I'm just here appreciating things for the first time. Get this lovely bottle here. By the way, the noise that you hear in the background would be, of course, some sort of machine that's meant for dehumidification. One is a HEPA, and that's because I have water damage to the bottom of my house because of a leaky bit of plumbing having to do with the ice maker line. I have to procure a new one of these because that one was not quite up to par anymore. It's been mostly burned. And as I have a limited supply of these left, I wish to use them sparingly. Now, this candle came from an Orthodox shop run by a man that attended an Orthodox church that I attended. It's meant for prayer and such. I'm not actually quite Christian. Cannot make that claim. But I'm not either. Not going to be very good for God. He's going to say, right. Those pearly gates, they're good and shut for you. But to me, that's really immaterial because I simply don't know. There is a suggestion that occurs that I don't know if it's an accident of upbringing, but there's a certain confluence of factors and coincidences. For instance, certain things seem to have coalesced the past few days for me, despite my difficulties with household affairs. And it just so happens that April 23rd is St. George's Day. Now, obviously, St. George is very heavily associated with England. It's on their flag, St. George's Cross. But it's also very prominent in Orthodox countries. And since I started planting garden, and they're coming up good, he's also associated with gardening, interestingly enough. Now, memories. What they chant for funerals at these churches is memory eternal. And I'm a sucker for sentimentality. And that's one of the reasons I'm lighting this right here, right now, because, well, scent just brings out so much goodness in terms of recollection. I need to stop making that clicking sound. I'm very self-aware. Keep doing that. It's horrific, isn't it? I apologize. Yes. Well, I must now procure some sharp implement with which to pry this open with tact and grace. It's not a cheap bottle of wine, so I'm not just going to tooth it like I do on occasion. Tact and grace. Well, it's tactical. It's a Marine Corps knife. Now, I'm not a Marine, although I did go on a wee bit of a jog, and I have been at a recruiting office. Interestingly enough, a girl from my high school was there, and I believe she became a Marine in a capacity. But yes, I also applied for the Navy, as some of you may know. Scored fairly well on the ASVAB, seemed to have the recruiter excited, but because when I was younger, I had anxiety disorder, probably due to copious amounts of caffeine and a rather haphazard childhood. They looked at that and said, well, can't take you. I don't know what it was, that or the fact that I was Russian, but there was also some oddness there, because one of the things they obviously ask is, why are you interested in joining the United States Navy? And the answer I gave, in written form no less, was, I would like to defend the United States Constitution. And the recruiter made it expressly clear that the Constitution was indeed just a piece of paper. Well, that is true. It is just a piece of paper. But it's a piece of paper that holds ideas that are animate in the minds of men, and that animate the course of history and the nature of the liberties that we enjoy. So, I found that a bit bizarre and troubling, coming from someone whose solemn duty it is to defend the Constitution. That flippancy there. Not a judge on his character, just saying it's a sign of the times. The sort of times that Mr. Eisenhower warned us about. Speaking of Eisenhower, my grandfather always recounts, much to my annoyance, the story of when he met him with his father, who was a liaisons officer in World War II. In fact, I believe I have a photograph, very interesting, standing in front of a plane, of, well, what I suppose is my great-grandfather. Not by blood, obviously, as I am adopted. But yes, the story goes as such. Oh. Eisenhower shook my hand and said, "A young Republican." And I don't remember the context of it, even though I've heard it 1,000 times over. Yeah? Let's see what this tastes like first. I want to say this is a bit fruitier. I could be wrong, though. Do not have a palate. Not yet. There is an article here, Glenfiddich versus Glenlivet, and I'm just going to read a very brief portion regarding the Glenfiddich, the thing that made me want to try it, because I am a hipster. This round would be considered valid only by the purists and uber enthusiasts, and by round, the nature of this article is boxing match between these two fine single malt scotches. The average whiskey drinker probably couldn't care less about how the whiskey came to be in the bottle. After all, surely what's more important is the flavor. But, notwithstanding that, it's an interesting point of comparison. Glenfiddich maintains what can loosely be described as a more traditional approach to distilling. The stills are small, directly fired, and the cuts are still taken manually by the stillman, well, at least in one of the still houses. Glenlivet, on the other hand, is fully automated these days, with one man at the console able to oversee all production. The stills are indirectly heated, and flow meters dictate and control the cut points. So which is the more powerful punchier? Glenfiddich for its more traditional approach, or Glenlivet for taking advantage of more modern technologies and efficiencies? As someone who likes his whiskey old-fashioned, we'll award round 3 to Glenfiddich, although we accept it's a contentious one. Now, for the very interesting photograph I promised, you must give me just a touch of time. It smells frightfully like 2013 or so in here, as per the incense. Now, isn't this a great piece of history lying forgotten on a shelf? I've been meaning to, well, get this framed, but there's always something amiss, like what's going on with the house. So yes, memory eternal and fitting, as it were, that again, St. George's Day occurred, British Isles, ancestry there. Scottish though, obviously not a fan of the English. However, close enough for our purposes. Now, let's read a bit about this St. George's Day. Because despite my interest in orthodoxy and some general knowledge about the subject, am not well versed in the saint nor his contextualization in the West. St. George's Day, 10 surprising facts. Things you probably didn't know about England's patron saint. St. George's Day, marked on 23rd April each year, is upon us once again, and interest surrounding the festival of England's primary patron saint shows no sign of abating. It's common knowledge that, according to legend, at least, St. George killed a dragon. But what else do you know about him? We bring you the facts. But which dragon did he kill? Was it this cute one? Hope not. Now, see, there's some old Russian on this portrayal of St. George slaying the dragon. Looks like Church Slavonic, in fact. So, yes. When did St. George's Day begin? What date is it celebrated on? And why did St. George kill a dragon? Professor Jonathan Good brings you 10 lesser known facts about England's patron saint. Did St. George really exist? Not necessarily. And he wasn't even English. Very little is known about the actual man, if he ever existed. George would likely have been a soldier somewhere in the Eastern Roman Empire, probably in what is now Turkey. According to legend, he was martyred for his faith under Emperor Diocletian in the early 4th century, and his major shrine is located in Lod, Israel. This one I found interesting. I find common wording. Number 2. St. George's earliest legends were so outlandish that the Pope condemned them. Early Christians were known to exaggerate the tortures endured by their martyrs, but St. George is in a league all of his own. According to one source, St. George was torn on the rack and hit on the head with hammers until his brains oozed out. Forced to drink poison. How plain was this poison? This is delicious poison. Torn on a wheel, boiled in lead, and much else besides, all over a period of 7 years. A 5th century decree attributed to Pope Gelasius declared that, lest it give rise to mockery, the details were not to be read out in church. And the reading of the Synaxarium at the end of Orthodox services, during Vespers and other such occasions. It's been a while. I don't know if they do it during Sunday, but I think that they do. That's the lives of the saints and such. There are crazy things said. How do you know they're true? Priests will say, oh, well, it's immaterial if they're true. I don't know. I do think there is a merit in having saints, but some of the things, are they really salvatory? Are they really enlightening? I was trying to think if that was a word that Christians would be fans of, seeing as the Enlightenment is seen as the antithesis of Christian doctrine in some circles. I don't necessarily think that has to be the case. But again, I'm not really a Christian. So, what am I? A lukewarm, hell-bound bastard. Well, let's get on with it then. A brief history of the English rose. This is just something that I clicked on, and there's various poems here. Picture of Robert Burns, and it got me to looking at some of these other pictures of Victorian era poets and such, and I really like that sort of thing. The carriage, the attention to detail, and the sort of lively morbidity where you're very aware of death and the brevity of life, and as such you sort of mortify the body and the senses through a sort of staid approach. And through that filter, you were able to experience exquisite vistas and elaborate upon them in verse or in any manner of your choosing, so long as it fits within the parameters of good taste. Yeah? I hope I'm making sense here. I'm just trying to entertain you, trying to give you some information, some associations from a mind on this spinning little globe, circling a crazy burning star in a universe that is in constant cataclysm, but somehow whole. That's probably trying a bit too much to be deep, but that's not really my intent. My intent is to kind of be appreciative of things. Yeah, this was the next order of business here. So, we have histories of philosophy. Now, one is written from the secularist perspective by Lord Russell, and one is written by Frederick Copleston. And his volume is very nearly, or it's probably just because of the lettering size difference, but this is just volume 1, Greece and Rome. So it's less of a jaunty run through history like Lord Russell did, and more of a in-depth exploration. And you know the Catholics are known for their scholastic merits, so let's read a bit about this one, shall we? Conceived originally as a serious presentation of the development of philosophy for Catholic seminary students, Frederick Copleston's 9-volume A History of Western Philosophy, A History of Philosophy, has journeyed far beyond the modest purpose of its author to universal acclaim as the best history of philosophy in English. Copleston, an Oxford Jesuit of immense erudition who once tangled with A.J. Ayer in a fabled debate about the existence of God and the possibility of metaphysics, knew that seminary students were fed a woefully inadequate diet of theses and proofs, and that their familiarity with most of history's great thinkers was reduced to simplistic caricatures. Copleston set out to redress the wrong by writing a complete history of Western philosophy, one crackling with incident and intellectual excitement, and one that gives full place to each thinker, presenting his thought in a beautifully rounded manner and showing his links to those who went before and to those who came after him. The result of Copleston's prodigious labors is a history of philosophy that is unlikely ever to be surpassed. Thought magazine summed up the general agreement among scholars and students alike when it reviewed Copleston's A History of Philosophy as broad-minded and objective, comprehensive and scholarly, unified and well-proportioned. We cannot recommend it too highly. Well, I hardly remember anything that I've read in here. I do remember finding it interesting. I do. Socrates. That was the first thing I saw. Empedocles, Heraclitus, Ionian, Cradle, Ionia. Yeah, well, it did start in Ionia with our good friend, Mr. Thales of Miletus. But Miletus is not Ionia. But the Ionian enchantment, as per the thing I read by E.O. Wilson, did have to do with Thales, I do believe. Ah, dear. Well, I shall read a bit from the preface, and eventually I will go through this book first, step by step, in these sorts of videos, and then this one, and see how they compare. Or maybe more doably, and go through the bit here that has to do with ancient Greece, as does this, and then go through this. Yes, there are so many histories of philosophy already in existence that it seems necessary to give some explanation why one has added to their number. My chief motive in writing this book, which is designed to be the first volume of a complete history of philosophy, has been that of supplying Catholic ecclesiastical seminaries with a work that should be somewhat more detailed and of wider scope than in textbooks commonly in use, and which at the same time should endeavor to exhibit the logical development and interconnection of philosophical systems. It is true that there are several works available in the English language which, as distinct from scientific monographs dealing with restricted topics, present an account at once scholarly and philosophical of the history of philosophy, but their point of view is sometimes very different from that of the present writer and of the type of student whom he has in mind when writing this book. To mention a point of view at all, when treating of history of philosophy, may occasion a certain lifting of the eyebrows. But no true historian can write without some point of view, some standpoint, if for no other reason than that he must have a principle of selection guiding his intelligent choice and arrangement of facts. And when Bertrand Russell was sort of attacked for just giving his opinion on history and taking history and molding it into a sort of supporting thesis for his opinion. That is precisely what he said there. There is a necessity for a selective principle, or something towards that effect. In fact, let's look up the Wikipedia article because it mentions exactly this, and I know that it's there. So, Bertrand Russell, History of Western Philosophy. So yes. There we are. Now, let's go down. Reception. A history of Western philosophy received a mixed reception, especially from academic reviewers. Russell was somewhat dismayed at the reaction. Russell himself described the text as a work of social history, asking that it be treated in such a manner. Russell also stated, I regarded the early part of my history of Western philosophy as a history of culture, but in later parts, where science becomes important, it is more difficult to fit into this framework. I did my best, but I am not sure that I succeeded. I was sometimes accused by reviewers of writing not a true history, here it is, but a biased account of the events that I arbitrarily chose to write of. But to my mind, a man without bias cannot write interesting history, if indeed such a man exists. Very similar to the statement that Mr. Coppelson just made. Yes, we are at the 26-minute mark, and I am going to prepare to go to bed as it is 11:16 p.m. here on the only coast that matters, the East Coast. I hope that life finds you well despite these crazy times. Yes, this is a cold sore, and take care. Cheers.